He has built all of us with a special place for God. And if we don't put God in that place, we will end up with a meaningless, frustrating, vanity-filled experience.
From San Diego, California, welcome to Turning Point with Dr. David Jeriemiah. In today's message, Finding Meaning in Your Manhood, Dr. Jeriemiah challenges men to search for their true purpose in life. What can a man do to find happiness, satisfaction, and fulfillment? Find out next on today's edition of Turning Point.
Hello, I'm David Jeriemiah, and welcome to this edition of Turning Point. When you study the life of King Solomon in the Bible, you find that he was an accomplished businessman, an architect, an author, and a politician. He had untold wealth at his disposal, but he continued to search for the meaning of life. Like Solomon, many men look for fulfillment in their career and accomplishments. Yet true significance is not found in one's bank statements, it's found in relationships. Although today's message is geared toward men, I know you ladies will benefit from listening in, so stay tuned as I share the study entitled, Finding Meaning in Your Manhood. Few men in baseball conjure up the nostalgia that Mickey Mantle does. I remember as a boy watching him play and thinking about him almost as if he were Superman. In a Sports Illustrated interview, Mickey Mantle described his long battle with alcohol, the agony of a son who died, and the grief of having a son on drugs. And the interviewer said to him, "So how are things going with you today, Mickey?" "Better," he replied. "I haven't had a drink in 8 months. I'm starting to get my life back together, but I just feel like there's something missing. Something missing." Billy Graham was sitting in the office of a college president at Harvard University one snowy day, and he asked the college president, "What is the greatest problem that your students face?" And the president stared out the window at the falling snow for a moment, and then he replied, "Emptiness. Emptiness is the greatest problem." When men feel empty, it is ultimately because they know that there's something more than what they're experiencing. And I believe that many men, and many men who go to church every Sunday, and many men who are in ministry, and perhaps many men here today, experience a kind of emptiness that is hard to describe. But in the Old Testament, there is a case study on the emptiness of man found in the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. This book, written under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit by Solomon, is one of the most interesting books in the Bible. If you begin to read the book without any knowledge of what it's all about, you might be confused. Because in the first 10 chapters of the book, Solomon seems to arrive at conclusions that are inconsistent with our Christian worldview. He uses a little phrase in the beginning of the book over and over again, and that little phrase is, "under the sun." And as you study what he's doing, you begin to realize that what Solomon is doing is he's conducting an experiment about life and what life would be like from the sun down, excluding from the sun up. In other words, he's trying to experiment with the idea of what life is like if God isn't present in the picture. He begins by trying to find meaning in his career. And I would suggest that most of the guys I know, and many of you that I talk to, we all are kind of in that category. We find our meaning in our career. If you walk up to a guy, you don't ask him about his home or his family. You ask him, "What do you do?" And then he begins to tell you about his career. You might think that doesn't happen among pastors, but it does. We all, if we are not careful, can get sidetracked into thinking that meaning in life comes out of what I do. Well, let me tell you about Solomon. He became the chief executive officer of a great empire, By his trading skills, he was acclaimed as the world's foremost merchant. As the leading shipping magnate, he had a fleet of merchant ships that sailed throughout the world collecting treasures. By his wealth, he easily topped the Forbes 400 list. He was a master builder who constructed mammoth projects. His architectural designs became the world's most important buildings. He built vineyards, gardens, parks, and reservoirs. Tired of commerce, he turned to science, relentlessly pursuing the classification of nature. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, building a vast army to defend and conquer. He was unanimously elected president of his country. He became the poet laureate for the nation. He had a distinguished career as a writer, and he was singularly gifted as a musician. Now, I would say that qualifies as a career. Several of them, in fact. No man ever lived a more dynamic life than did Solomon. He was the wisest man who ever lived and probably the wealthiest man who ever lived. And yet Solomon, reflecting on his life, said that all of these things left him empty. The word that he uses for empty is the word vanity. It means without meaning. Another phrase he uses to describe these things is the grasping for the wind, the grasping after the air. Look at verses 17 and following. Therefore I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me. For all is vanity and grasping for the wind, and I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. I don't know how that grabs you, but that is an amazing confession on the part of this man who had everything, who experienced everything you could ever want to experience in a career. And what Solomon learned was this, that our work will not be fulfilling if it is the principal means of our being fulfilled. Let me say that again. The work we do will not be fulfilling to us if it is the only means of our being fulfilled. I had a defining moment in my life some years ago before I came to this church. I was the pastor of the Black Hawk Baptist Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a church that I had started in 1969. And in 1981, this church began to talk with me about coming here to be the pastor of what was then Scott Memorial Baptist Church. And I was agonizing over this, probably the most important decision I'd ever made in my life, apart from getting married, that I was going to move all the way across the country. I didn't know anything about California, but I'd heard lots about it. And I knew everything about where I was. I'd built everything there was. We'd built several buildings, and we had a wonderful ministry. And I was just in such agony about what to do. And I remember one day walking across the parking lot at the Black Hawk Baptist Church, thinking about this, and this thought popped into my head, and it was a defining moment for me. And the thought was, is there a David Jeremiah apart from the Black Hawk Baptist Church? I had so welded my identity with that little congregation that started with 7 families and had been a part of everything that had happened, that whenever I thought of David Jeremiah, I thought of the Black Hawk Baptist Church. I thought, that's who I am. If I leave here, I will lose my identity. And then what do I do? And I confess that many men that I have talked to have described similar circumstances in their own life. The majority of men today find their meaning in life in their career. And many Christians fall into this category as well. What Solomon found out through his research, we are discovering every day if we will just be honest about it. I believe I can find meaning in life only through my career. Then if that's true, I will be tempted to sacrifice everything I am and do to that career. Everything outside of my career will be relegated to lesser and lesser status until my life is nothing but what Solomon called the chasing after the wind. And that's where we're tempted. That's where I'm tempted as a man, to get so absorbed in what I do that it takes every hour of my day, and the really important things in my life get shoved off to the side while I pursue a career. In the book by Patrick Morley, he tells this story. He says, every morning in Africa, when the sun comes up, a gazelle awakens and knows that it must run faster than the fastest lion or it will perish. Every morning in Africa, when the sun comes up, a lion awakens and knows that it must run faster than the slowest gazelle or it will go hungry. It doesn't make any difference if you're a gazelle or a lion. Every morning in Africa, when the sun comes up, you better be running. And that's the way it is a lot of times for men, isn't it? They get up in the morning and they run from morning till night, pursuing their career. And Morley says in his book that everywhere he goes, he sees men that are tired. And he says not just physically tired, but they're psychologically tired and emotionally tired and spiritually tired, exhausted by life, worn to a thread, beat up, bone tired. By the time some of us realize what we have done, we have allowed relationships to be damaged. But I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to change. I don't think any of us ever start out to do this. I wouldn't give you a penny for a guy who doesn't want to succeed. We all want to succeed. That's what we're put together with. It's something God puts in us to succeed. But you see, we begin to measure success in terms of what we do instead of who we are. And when that happens, we get off on a cul-de-sac that takes us away from what real meaning in life is all about. Solomon looked for meaning in his career, and he got to the end of the research and he said, you know what? It's not there. It's empty. So the next experiment he undertook was to look for meaning in the accumulation of wealth. It's not disassociated with his career, but it's a totally different pursuit. And listen to Solomon in his analysis of his pursuit. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. And watch this. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And all God's people said, amen. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. One man said, I already have enough money to live on for the rest of my life as long as I die the day after tomorrow.